Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. It's taken me a long time to get this out, and I apologize for that. This recap from my Vampire the Masquerade V5 Chronicle, The Sword of Caine, Part 2, or Fall from the Nest, will take place on March 15th, Monday, 1993. The session started with the Coterie going to this new haven that William Cobb is letting them borrow due to the service they completed in the previous session. It's pretty well located so that they can get to most places in the city without having to drive too far. This building is a nice enough townhouse, completed with a security staff provided by William Cobb, and headed by some dude named Kenneth. It also has an armory, um, with some long rifles that can be used. Make no mistake about it, Kenneth reports back to Mr. Cobb, but as this place is on loan for them, Kenneth will help for as long as that remains true. It's got a couple of bedrooms, and there's a little moment where the different people in the coterie go and claim different bedrooms. Richard goes and puts an ashtray in one room, and Negan puts his sunglasses in one as well. I think I remember Jack switching some of them around and claiming a different room, just to cause a little chaos. Upon seeing this house for the first time, Negan immediately decides that this is a great place to have a party, and goes to the backyard and calls one of his friends named Ethan to get some of the things arranged for a future party. After a little bit more touring of the townhouse and other goofing off, the coterie decides to continue the work that they've been gathered to do, hunting the Sabbat. On this night, they're following the lead of that license plate that Richard had previously gathered. Um, when the coterie first met at Jack's club, the 5 o'clock, they had been tracking a Sabbat member named Amber, and Richard followed her, and she eventually got picked up by a car, and Richard got its license plate. Nick was able to track down where the documents of this license plate would be, but he couldn't just pull them. The coterie would have to go into this courthouse and find them themselves, but they found the courthouse. Naturally, the coterie goes to the courthouse, and for once, they actually have a little bit of a plan. Elijah was going to go distract the lady at the front, and then at some point when the door was opened, Richard would sneak on through, as he is so capable of doing, and find the documents that the coterie was after. The lady at the front was a somewhat elderly woman named Samantha, and Elijah actually seemed to enjoy conversing with her. Elijah said that he needed to get his license plate renewed, and they ended up talking about family weddings, and Samantha ended up convinced that she was somehow distantly related to Elijah. She talked about her kids and showed off pictures of her grandkids, and Elijah entertained her the whole time, and I think actually enjoyed it. Meanwhile, in the back, Richard had managed to track down the documents they were looking for. Not only the name attached to the license plate, one Jace Haney, but also an address tied to this identity. So the coterie actually had a lead. When Richard was back there, he also did a little independent digging. It was kind of funny because I realized for the first time all the coterie's last names really start with the same letter except for Richard, Jack White, or Jack Walter, Negan White, Elijah Wall. And so it meant Richard could find multiple of their documents at the same time pretty easily. When he looked into Negan White's files, he found that Negan had all sorts of vehicle licenses, and when he looked into Elijah Wall's identity, he found an address that was tied to it. He didn't have time to investigate Jack's file, though. So the coterie began to leave, and Negan stuck behind a little bit, though. A little spoiler part, so if you are not Negan and you're a player, turn around. Negan White is the character's mask identity. His real name in life was Negan Smith. Negan asked the lady to look into Negan Smith, and she reports that Negan Smith is dead, died in a car crash. Negan had been curious for some time as to whether all his old friends thought he was dead, and this cleared it up for him. So the Coterie decided, with Nick's counsel, that it would be best to investigate this address now. So the Coterie drove over to this neighborhood kind of on the outskirts of town. It was scarce, and they knew response time would be pretty slow. The Coterie has spent a lot of time in similar parts of town recently with all their interactions with the Sabbat. The Coterie actually decided to play this kind of smart. They sent Richard ahead, and he went around the house and investigated its layout. Pretty basic. I won't go into too much detail here for brevity's sake. It says something about our gaming heritage. You know, how in depth I was explaining this house to them. We come from a D&D background. One of my players jokingly said I should map out this house in some way. They mentioned The Sims 4. Personally, I wish to avoid doing this at all costs. I'm trying to navigate us towards the theater of the mind type gameplay and away from having a battle map, which I would do in a game like D&D, but not here. If you have any opinions or advice on this, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, this is a 2-story house with a backyard and a semi-open floor plan on the bottom floor. Richard went around and investigated all of this, and he used his Soaring Leap ability in combination with his Silence of Death ability to be completely silent as he used it to investigate the second story from the outside, slamming against the wall with no sound. He got a good look and saw armed guards on the above floor, and there was also a locked room with no windows. The plan here was, well, calling it a plan is generous. Elijah and Richard would come in from the back, and Negan would bust down the front door, kill some people, and Jack would follow behind as support. It should be mentioned that both Negan and Jack took the Stigmata Flaw, and as they activated their abilities, raising their hunger, they both got Hunger 4. Dangerous place to be. They both decided to reflavor the Stigmata as bleeding from the eyes, which I'm fine with. It's still just as, if not more negative than the usual from the hands and feet. But I'm just a sucker for biblical symbolism, so. The plan went well enough at first. Elijah and Richard engaged in a firefight, immediately getting one of the guards in the rear down. Negan bursts in, immediately killing a guard with his potence and injuring another. I believe he killed the first one by slamming their head against the banister of the stairs. Jack came in, and using his telekinetic abilities from his Thin Blood Alchemy, he threw the injured man against the wall, killing him. A little more fighting in the rear, and the Coterie fell to a pitfall they do sometimes, feeding before combat is over. This can be more effective in terms of slaking hunger, and as, you know, once the bodies have expired, they are less useful. It does, however, mean that all the members of the Coterie who are feeding will be indisposed as they accomplish this. And as there are 2 armed guards still upstairs, both with shotguns, this might not be the wisest time to feed like this. But Elijah and Richard dove for the floor and were ready when these men came running down from the stairs. One was killed quickly, and the other was disarmed, though with a knife he did attempt to stab Jack before he was killed. Negan, going to the back in the kitchen, he got on top of a counter and attempted to break through the ceiling into the above floor. He did succeed, but, you know, he was halfway into this locked room, halfway through the ceiling and halfway still on the floor below. When he got up there, he was face to face with a Nosferatu with a shotgun. Because of a high roll, I did allow him to fall back through the floor and avoid being shot by a shotgun. The Nosferatu engaged in a little hit-and-run tactics with the Coterie. He shot Elijah with a shotgun, stating that this isn't a war you can win, before turning invisible again. I really do think people underestimate how powerful of a combat discipline Obfuscate is. The Coterie didn't have any super effective way to find him either. Nick, a ghoul who does have access to a little Auspex, was waiting outside to make sure that nobody escaped from the house, so he wasn't able to help in this regard. The Coterie blocked off all the exits, though, and tried to use Flower to track down the obfuscated kindred, but this wasn't an effective method. Richard, who is a member of Clan Nosferatu, blocked off the back exit. This Nosferatu whispered in his ear, saying to let him through. You don't want to hurt another member of the clan. Richard promptly unloaded his shotgun directly in front of him where he expected the obfuscated Nosferatu to be and hit him, causing him to be visible and also severely hurt. At this time, Nick ran in and Jack used his telekinetic abilities to levitate the Nosferatu in the air, and the whole coterie opened fire on him and knocked him into torpor. The coterie, as they are fond of doing, slaked a little bit of hunger on the dead and dying bodies. Richard quickly went upstairs and grabbed a couple papers from the now unlocked room, which turned out to be a office, and also grabbing a desktop computer. Elijah and Nick carried the torpid Nosferatu out into the car. And Jack spent some time gathering a little bit of the blood into his syringes, possibly for usage in experimentation, possibly for consumption. Negan grabbed one of the shotguns and went out to his bike. The coterie completed this just as the police officers began arriving at the scene. Negan decided to speed off on his bike, confident he could lose them. This allowed the rest of the coterie to escape really easily, though. So, there's an argument to be made. I will carry this part forward from just the Negan perspective, and then I will do the rest of the coterie's perspective. So, other players, look away. Negan was in a high-speed chase with police officers. He has an absolutely crazy driving dice pool. However, he didn't get very many successes, and really didn't have much willpower to burn. So he was having a hard time losing them. As an ST, whether for Vamp or other stories, I think it's important to have multiple fail states. So I allowed Negan to risk it, double or nothing, raise the stakes. He was going to attempt to make a high-speed turn through an alleyway. If he succeeded, he would lose the police officers. However, he did not succeed. He crashed his motorcycle against the brick wall at high speed, sustaining some damage. He had pieces of metal stuck through him, blood all over him. He only survived due to the great resilience granted by the vampiric state. He managed to walk away, though. But obviously he was a little bit of an eyesore at this point in time, you could say. Walking through the alleys, he eventually managed to lose the police and made it through made it near a nice restaurant. In the alleyways, he saw a man who was smoking, and decided to feed on him. Thought it'd be a good time. He was hungry, injured, he needed blood. He managed to feed, but somebody noticed. This somebody told Negan to freeze and that he was poaching on his domain. Negan complied, froze, didn't look back as instructed. At no point did he see the man. Or, it's a man, no point in hiding that. He would not have the opportunity to look around and see who it was before he was staked. Now for the rest of the coterie's perspective. The coterie drove back to the Moran and began talking in a quiet conference room. Jack began looking at the computer and discovered a connection to something known as ShrekNet. He wasn't able to access this service, though, but he took the computer for further research. Elijah asked Richard to investigate a reporter by the name of Jennifer Day. She wrote a newspaper article that was a cover-up for a previous mission the coterie had been on, back when the coterie was just Elijah and Negan. Some Elijah spoilers. Before the night was over, David Rena requested a solo meeting with Elijah. He asked Elijah about how progress was coming and about Negan. Elijah said that they got split up with Negan at some point. He also mentioned that he was going to have the Nosferatu they captured out of torpor in the near future. This is just for Jack and Richard. David Reno had a meeting with Jack and Richard. He basically asked about what happened that night, if they knew where Negan was, and told them that they would have some free time until the Nosferatu was brought back from torpor. Reno also reminded Jack that he wanted a report of his capacities. With that being the session's end, I think it's time we get to voting. The session actually happened over 2 different scenes. Because of my own foolishness. Things happened in real life that caused me to have to come back and run it later. Um, because of this, I'm just going to talk about the voting we did for the parts that I have more notes on. I hope that's okay with everyone. And this won't happen again in the future, as far as I can control it. Richard voted for Jack due to his truly creative usage of telekinesis powers in combat. Lifting up the Nosferatu so everyone could shoot at him, slamming people against walls. It was super cool. Jack voted for Richard for being so useful in espionage and scouting. It was really good stuff. Richard really got a shine in that session. Elijah voted for Richard not only due to his usefulness, but also the scene where he was looking into information about the other members of the Coterie during the courthouse scene. It really says something about the game we're playing. Negan voted for Jack due to a bunch of not only the way he acted in combat, but also a bunch of the things that happened just conversation between characters that I couldn't manage to fit inside of this recap. I'd like to apologize for the time it took to upload this. A lot of things came up within my own life, weddings, I'm busy with classes, for a time, I really just didn't feel motivated to work on this, and all sorts of other things. Um, I've got a bit of a backlog of content now. I've got a lot of stuff to upload, and I should expect that I'll be able to make more in the near future. If you have any advice or questions for my or for your own chronicle, please comment. I'd love to talk about it. If you enjoyed the video, please like it, and if you want to see more, please subscribe. If not, don't. Tell me what I could do better, though. Um, I would absolutely love to hear about your own chronicles or questions, though. Anyways, I hope you all have a pleasant evening.